in combination with Power Automate and Power Automate Desktop for invoice processing. So let me just quickly introduce myself before we delve into the topic. So as mentioned, my name is Agnius. I run an agency that specializes in process improvement and automation. I'm fairly knowledgeable in Power Automate and especially in Power Automate Desktop. And well, since earlier this year, I'm also a Microsoft Business Applications MVP in the area of Power Automate. Right. And the topic for today, as mentioned, is, well, AI Builder in combination with Power Automate to process invoices. And the agenda is fairly straightforward. So I'll show you a few slides where I cover the basics of the topic and on invoice processing in general, and then on the use of AI Builder and Power Automate for Desktop to do it. And then I'll switch to some demos where I show you what that actually looks like in practice. Then I'll wrap up with some key takeaways, summarizing the whole thing, and we can have some Q&A at the end. So I assume there's a Q&A functionality in the chat, so you can raise questions throughout the session, but I'll try to answer all of them at the end. Right, so let's start. And first of all, when it comes to invoice processing, well, in general, the reason why it's a topic that actually it can get quite complex is because invoices can actually come in various shapes and sizes. So first of all, there's generally two pretty wide types of invoices that we can receive as organizations. First of all, those are digital, as in digitally, electronically generated invoices that are, well, usually saved or, well, exported from some sort of a software, like an accounting system, an ERP software, or something like that, and then sent directly via electronic means of communication to us from a supplier. So they're digital, meaning that we can relatively easily export the information from it and then use it for further processing. Or they can also be, well, they can also require digitization, meaning that they're not really digital. They can be printed documents that we get on paper. They could be printed and scanned documents that, well, either we receive it as a printed document and then scan it, or in some cases, even the supplier themselves might actually print it, then sign it by hand, and then scan it and send it over by email. I know this sounds a bit ridiculous in the 21st century, but it does actually happen. And we might even receive handwritten documents as invoices. That actually does still happen. However strange that might sound, but it does. And yeah, so these sorts of things. And then they can also come in various formats. When it comes to digital documents, these are relatively nice to process and automate. They can still come in various formats. We can get it as a PDF document, which is the most frequent, most popular. That's usually okay-ish. But we can also get it as a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. That usually these sorts of documents are actually issued by smaller businesses, maybe freelancers and so on, who just basically use Word templates or Excel templates or whatever sort of templates to actually issue their invoices, and then they don't even bother to actually convert them to a PDF file and just send over this funky file to their clients for processing. Or we can also get some structured data files like XML or JSON or things like that, which are actually great because they contain all of the information about the invoice in a structured format that's easily to ingest into any system. Those are really cool. They usually come in addition to a proper PDF document, so that they're actually both, kind of human-friendly, but also very automation-friendly. It's great when we receive those, but they're pretty rare. Only some suppliers actually bother to do that. And then, when it comes to those invoices that actually require further digitization, we could get them, scanned as images or PDF files. So both are also valid. So plenty of types, plenty of formats in which we could actually receive those documents. And if we want to be able to process all of them or a majority of them, it then becomes a complex task. Now, when we want to process them, the first thing that comes to mind, especially when talking about Microsoft's products and the Power Platform, is Power Automate, because that's the automation tool in the Power Platform and in the Microsoft ecosystem, right? So if we're working with digital documents only, they can actually be processed by just reading the contents directly in a Power Automate flow, whether a desktop flow or a cloud flow, whatever. We can usually read PDF documents, we can read Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, we can definitely read XML or JSON files. So those are usually nice and relatively okay to automate. However, without the ability to actually use some intelligence to actually recognize those documents, this would usually require us building a separate flow for pretty much every different invoice format or template, which means pretty much for every supplier that we have, because most suppliers will have their own template for their documents. And if, in some very rare cases, you might notice that several different suppliers might issue invoices in the same format. That just basically means that they're using the same software for issuing their invoices, but that's pretty rare. And usually every single supplier that we have to work with will have a different template for their invoices. And if we just want to build a flow that just kind of reads the contents in there and parses them without using any intelligence, we'll just basically have to build a flow for every single one of them, which is okay-ish if we're tight on our budgets, and we don't really want to automate all of our invoices, but the goal is basically to just automate the sum of the highest volume vendors. So basically only those vendors that issue the most invoices. So as in, just kind of picking up the low-hanging fruit. But if we, sorry about that. If we want to actually process more of them, or if we have to work with OCR documents, then we will eventually have, with scan documents, we will eventually have to have some intelligence in it, because scan documents will require OCR if we just work natively within Power Automate without any intelligence. And OCR, or optical character recognition, is not really accurate natively in Power Automate. And it depends on external factors such as, the scan quality. In some cases, we might be able to control that if we actually get the invoice by mail as a paper document that we scan. But if it's our suppliers scanning it and then sending it to us, we can't even control the scan quality, the device being used, and how competent the person is in actually putting the piece of paper into the scanner. So that's also the things that are actually quite hard to control. And then when it comes to handwritten documents, it's pretty much impossible to properly digitize or automate them in any way. So it's actually best to just kind of persuade your vendors to switch to proper digital documents, or just change your vendors and find someone who's more modern. Right. So as mentioned, unless we want to just kind of automate a few of our suppliers, and if we actually want to work with more of them, if we want to automate the majority of them, we will need some intelligence in our flows. And the intelligence in terms of the Microsoft ecosystem and the Power Platform is in the AI Builder. And the AI Builder is basically a feature in the Power Platform that is specifically designed to enable makers and users to just train their own models that can then process documents, process data, and basically fetch whatever information is actually needed from unstructured contents. Now, one of the most frequent use cases for it is document processing. And within document processing as a category, the most frequent documents to be processed are invoices, because every business receives invoices. The second biggest type of documents to be processed are usually orders, as in, our customers sending us orders. That's quite frequent in B2B situations where clients issue their own purchase orders in their system and then send it over to their suppliers. And then, on the supplier side, it needs to be converted into a sales order. Yes, that's also a frequent use case, but it's not as frequent as invoices because it has its limitations, right? It needs to be in a B2B situation. It needs to be in a case where our organization, the receiving party, doesn't have their own ordering system and actually accepts these sorts of orders and so on. Whereas invoices is a universal thing. It's a thing that every organization, regardless of their size and their industry, will receive some of them. And if there's enough of them, it will make sense to automate it. And that's why it's so frequently actually automated. Right. So when it comes to AI Builder and using it for processing invoices, it makes the most sense to do it and to use it when we want to automate all of our invoices or the majority of them. And if we have more than a few vendors with these different formats. So, if we're a small business that only have a few vendors, might not necessarily make sense to use it. Might be easy enough to just build the flows for each of the vendors. But if we have more than a few and we want to automate all of them, then it definitely makes sense to use the intelligence. So that's that. But it also makes a lot of sense if our invoices all include both digital and scanned documents, because building native Power Automate flows without any intelligence that would process both of these will usually not make a great business case. It will usually be complex, difficult. It will not have a high accuracy rate, and it will cost a lot to actually build it. So in those cases, AI Builder makes a lot of sense. Now, it has some pre-built functionality, some pre-built models and solutions, but spinning up a new model is very straightforward. I'll show you that during the demo in a sec. But before that, just a quick thing. There's an important thing to note when it comes to AI Builder, is that there's a thing called AI Builder credits, and these credits are like the currency that's basically being used whenever we use an operation under AI Builder. So whatever we run through it, will consume some credits. Now, different functionalities consume different amounts, and according to the latest licensing guide for the Power Platform, processing a single document page consumes 100 credits. So that's not a single invoice. If your invoices are multi-page, they will actually consume more than 100 credits per invoice, because that's just per page. And then there is, the standard license for AI Builder is basically, it's not really a license, it's an add-on, a capacity add-on. That's not standalone. It doesn't work standalone. It still requires a Power Automate license to actually run anything through it. But the add-on will contain 1 million credits, meaning 10,000 pages, and it will cost $500 a month. Now, that might sound a lot, and that might be why people think it's expensive to automate invoices. But there's a caveat into it about every single paid Power Automate license, whether premium or process, actually including some credits, which is 5,000 credits per license, meaning 50 pages. That and they can be pooled up to 1 million credits at tenant level, meaning that if we're a small business and we're looking to process up to 1,650 pages per month, which is okay-ish enough, that's could cover most of the use cases for most smaller and mid-sized businesses. It is cheaper to get 33 Power Automate premium licenses to cover the need than buying a single capacity add-on for AI Builder. And this will mean that we will actually also get all of those licenses for running flows and building more than just invoice processing flows, we could use it for a lot more. Whereas if we purchased an add-on for AI Builder, you would still need at least one premium license or a process license to actually build flows and run them to be able to consume those credits. So yeah, so it's an important thing to check and validate and calculate when making and testing your business case for automating invoices, is to figure out the best way to actually license it. Right. And then when we actually have the model set up, when an AI Builder model is already there, it, well, obviously, as mentioned, needs to be used in a flow. It doesn't really do anything on its own. And we would normally use a Power Automate Cloud flow to do most of it, right? So there's a step where it needs to actually, be triggered or run on a schedule. Like, when we receive an email with the invoice and react to it and process it, or, maybe running on a schedule to run daily and pick up all of the invoices in some folder or something like that. Then we would just pick up the document, get its contents, maybe have some logic like identifying the vendor, maybe picking the model to be used if we have more than one. Then sending the document through the model to be processed, and then parsing the results. That's the minimum that we would normally have in a cloud flow, to just basically get the document and get the data out of it by using AI Builder. And then once we actually have parsed it, we need to put the data somewhere, right? So processing an invoice means it needs to land in some sort of an accounting system or an ERP software or something like that. Cloud flows could handle that for modern systems. You're a Dynamics 365 user group, right? So if it's a Business Central or FNO or something like that, we can push it directly through the integration from Cloud Flows. But if it needs to land in a more legacy accounting software, even if that's Dynamics, right? NAV 2009, anyone, or Axapta or whatever, anything that doesn't actually have a connector, that doesn't actually have APIs available for creating entries, we would need to automate the user interface, and then that's where desktop flows come in. So a cloud flow then basically becomes a dispatcher type of a flow that basically just kind of reacts to the invoice, picks it up, pushes it through the model, and then launches the desktop flow, while the desktop flow does the heavy lifting of actually pushing the document data into the application where it needs to land. Right. Okay, so it's now time for me to stop using the slides and switch to a demo. Right, so for the purpose of this demo, I've got a solution created with some components in it. So there's a cloud flow over here that basically picks up those documents and does the whole thing. There's also a desktop flow for automating a legacy system to push all of that. I've got a funky legacy system that I'm going to show you. That has no integrations, no databases or anything. It's just very strange. And then, some desktop flow binary data. But then also I've got this AI model over there and a work queue. So I'll take you through all of those. And the first thing in here is the AI model. So I'll show you how to set up an AI model from scratch and then just basically take you through the whole thing. So in AI models over here, or maybe actually if we start with AI Hub over here, there is actually a solution, a sort of a pre-configured solution called document automation that is available in some geographies. It doesn't even work in most. Actually, the last time I checked, it only works in the US environments, but it might, have been fixed. They've promised to fix it throughout September. But basically, it's got this sort of a custom document and invoice solution. If we were to select this and install it, it would basically deploy a solution that includes flows, includes the model, and also some apps as well to basically kind of do reviews and approvals of the document extracted on the data extracted from the documents and so on. So it might, it has some pre-configured things. You could also customize it. It also requires more licenses because it involves both Power Automate and Power Apps and so on. There's further solutions coming up at some point for processing different documents as well. But if we just wanted to basically create our own model and use it in a flow without, the whole large thing, we could just go to, back to AI Hub. And then there's this AI models over here. And if we want to process documents, we have a few choices to choose from. There is also a pre-configured, pre-built model for invoice processing that we could use. What it basically means is that it already has fields pre-configured for what Microsoft thinks should be in an invoice. And it's been trained on some sample invoices, and we don't really get to change it. We can just kind of use it in a flow or an app, and that's that, basically. Or we can create a custom model. And, we can go through this and create a custom model for documents. And if we do that, when it loads, we'll get the option to choose the type of a document that we want to work with. And there are a couple where we can work with fixed template documents. So these are, documents that are not really invoices, but they do follow a standard structure. So these could be some applications, could be orders and so on. We could work with general documents, agreements, contracts, and things like that are unstructured, but we just need to extract some specific values from them. And there is actually a type for invoices. So this is already similar. We get to use a pre-configured kind of a functionality. It's not a pre-configured model. So we get to customize a model that is, kind of designed to work with invoices. And if we choose this, we can then have some fields that again, Microsoft expects to be on an invoice. Like, the addresses of the customer and the customer details, basically some vendor details and so on, and some values. We can't really modify these. We can't really remove them. We can only change the format on some of the number fields and the date fields. Not much more than that, just the formatting itself. And we can add some fields. If this doesn't cover all of our needs, we can add some fields over there. Also includes the items table. So this is a table for whatever items we expect. And we can also customize this by adding more columns if we want to. Right, and then if we are okay with this list, we move on and add collections and train this. So from this point, I'm just going to switch to an actual model that I have already trained and just show you how to modify it. So if you've already got one and wanted to add more invoices, train it, and so on, you would open it and edit it. What you will land in is a similar view that I've just shown you when creating a new one, except with the only exception of that, we can't really change the type of the document anymore because, once you saved it as an invoice processing model, it can't be switched to a different document type. But we can still modify that, add the fields if we want to. And then the next step is collections. So collections inside an AI builder model basically mean groups of documents of the same template. So for the best accuracy and the best performance on your model, when you want to process invoices from different suppliers, you would basically just create a collection per supplier, and then put all of the invoices from that supplier into a single collection and then, tag them in there. So I'll show you what tagging means later on. But basically, collections are per supplier. If for whatever reason you have some suppliers that actually have, that actually send you invoices in both formats, both an electronic format and a scanned document, or a paper document that you scan yourselves, then put those in separate collections as well and train them separately. Now, a single model will support up to 200 collections. So that could cover, basically 200 vendors in most cases, which is probably enough to most smaller and mid-sized businesses. But for larger businesses, you might need more than that. And in that case, you would need to create additional models. And then in your Cloudflow, when you actually call AI Builder to process a document, you would need to add some additional logic to figure out which model needs to be used before actually using it. Could be by just parsing some of the contents of the invoice, trying to recognize it, maybe figuring it out based on whoever sent the email with the invoice, or just having a separate AI Builder model for classification of the documents, and so on. Right. So when working with those collections, I'll just quickly create a new one. So what we do is we add documents to it from some of the sources that are available. In my case, I'll just push it from my own computer. So add a few. Normally, if when you're training a model for an actual business scenario to automate documents, you'd want to add as many as possible to train the model to be as accurate as possible, to have it trained on as much data as possible. In my case, for the purpose of the demo, I just went with a few documents because I'll actually need to click through them all, so that it's not just tedious work. Right, and once these are added, you can also name them based on the supplier if you want to. The next step is actually tagging those documents. So in this step, we get to go through all of those collections that we've just added. In my case, the first three have already been tagged, but the fourth one is where I need to tag those. And now we see all of those fields, and some of them are already captured. And in this case, I specifically picked a localized version of the document. This is in Lithuanian, so that I could see if it actually works fine, and it does. It captures all of these fields correctly. The supplier name, the address, their tax ID, the client name and address and their tax IDs, the document number, the document date, and the due date, the items that look like this, and the totals and the tax, the subtotals and so on. So this actually works very well in most cases, especially with documents that are of relatively high quality. But for example, I've in the Cloudflow that uses this model, I've actually trained it to use a customer name field instead of a customer address recipient, and it tends to kind of capture this one. So I need to modify this, right? And I would need to tell it that this is not available in the collection, so it stops using this one, but then tell it that the customer name is actually available in the document, not the collection. So, I'm just basically showing it and capturing it on this particular document. And then it finds it, and then again, this document is okay. I still need to click through all of them to check whether it's still okay. And when I click to the next one, it actually figures out that I want to use customer name instead of the customer address recipient. And it figures this out and it captures it properly. And all I need to do is just basically check whether the fields are actually correct and click through all of them. Now, obviously, this is a nice scenario. In some cases, it might not work that well, especially with scanned documents. Or, I've had a case where the headers between, a certain supplier actually had a header saying that this is the company name, this is the company address, and the spacing between the headers and the actual values was tiny. And then the model would pick up too much info. It would actually include a header into the name of the company, which, and it was tricky to actually recapture that. So that could happen. And that's why we actually do need to review what it actually finds on its own, might need some fixing and so on. But then once you do that, it's usually trained well and usually will pick it up properly for the next documents, and we just need to review it. Right, and then when I click next, it will just give me some summary of what sort of fields have been captured, how many collections I've got, and so on. And if I click train, it will start training. And that's when I can get back here. Once it's done with the training, might take a sec. Right, so I'll close this page. Right, I'll check this out. Usually takes a minute or so to train the model with the few invoices I've just added. Right. Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Still being trained, it seems, because when it's done, when it's trained, then it will also ask me to publish it. At this point, before I publish it, even if it's trained, it will, yeah, right. So it's still retraining. So when it's finally trained and can be published, then it will actually be possible to use it for the specific invoices that I've added. Right. Okay, I will just close out on some of these. Now, the next step, while it's training, I'll just quickly show you the cloud flow that actually uses it. All right, so that's the next part of the whole solution. So I've got a cloud flow that basically reacts to a SharePoint directory where invoices could land. And then I've got, basically, I'm getting the contents of the file and pushing it through my model. Again, because I've only got one. If I had more, then I would probably have some logic in here to figure out which one to use. Just fetches all of the data. Because I'm also parsing the invoice lines and not only the header information, I also just have to do some processing over here to actually parse it nicely. Because the invoice lines, you know, if you've ever worked with Power Automate, you know that there's no such thing as a table in Power Automate. Every table that Power Automate reads becomes a list, an array of objects, basically. And those objects, in some cases, contain too much information, some irrelevant information, and so on. I'm just basically just formatting it nicely in here. And I'm composing a work item. So this is what it will look like. It's a JSON blob with some header information for the invoice and then the lines over there. And I'm just creating a queue item, and which, you know, queue items are basically, they reside in a table in Dataverse. So I just add a new row with a status queued, and that's it. I'm just pushing the outputs of this compose in there. And then when that's done, I run a desktop flow to process it. So when this cloud flow creates a queue item, it will appear in a work queue like this. So this is a very standard default work queue. I haven't added any extra fields in it, just for the purpose of standardization. But what it looks like, and these are some items that have already been processed while testing, I've just added the invoice details in here as a sort of a JSON blob. All right, and then I've got an invoice that looks something like this. So this is a fake invoice, just I've created one myself, fake scam corporation that doesn't exist, but we're still billing us, just for the purpose of adding some humor to the demo. And I'll just push it through, and then, you know, because it takes us a few seconds to actually process it, I will, oh, right, okay, so it's already done with training, so I'll publish this new version. And then I will upload a document onto this SharePoint site to trigger the flow. So the flow might take us a minute before it actually notices the document has actually appeared in this. So I will then take you through the desktop flow part. So the desktop flow, I've got one over here, which basically it has like 27 subflows, but, you know, that's because it follows my framework that I've built for standardized flows, but I won't really take you through all of them. It basically, all it does is works with, you know, work queue items. It has a queue, processes them one by one. It has some redirect functionality, and then it essentially just calls some subflows that launch the ERP system, waits for it to open up, and then just presses buttons populates text fields and all sorts of things like that by using the data from the queue item that I just picked up. So you'll soon see what it actually looks like in practice when the flow starts. It uses this very funky legacy system that I've got my hands on when it does actually start. So I've got this, it's a local Lithuanian legacy system for basically an ERP system that just, hasn't been updated in a few decades, I think. It's been used mostly by accountants that are old school accountants that, just kind of like the fact that they know the system and new people don't. People who don't want to be replaced, they kind of clench to this ERP software. And I don't like it. It doesn't have any APIs. It doesn't even have a database. When I asked the developers about whether there is a database that I could query, they just ignored my request, and that's it. But I found a demo version of it. And yeah, so that's what I use for this demo. And it doesn't even have a localization to English. It's a Lithuanian. When I showed this to Microsoft, they asked me about an English version because they liked it so much for demos. They wanted to have an English version, but yeah, unfortunately, there isn't one. All right, so so it should start soon. And we'll see it run when it does. Might take a few seconds. That's how actually it is with desktop flows. And that's why you would usually recommend using cloud flows when possible, when it's actually available and when you don't need to automate a legacy system. A cloud flow is much more efficient. A desktop flow will actually take at least, could take actually a minute to just start after having been initialized by a cloud flow, because it actually downloads the definition, and there's some communication happening between the cloud and the desktop, and it takes a while for it to just basically start on the machine. And then when it's done, it actually takes some time to actually send the completion back to the cloud flow that is actually completed and done, so that the cloud flow can continue. But in this case, it's actually taking longer than I would have expected. I guess that's because of me streaming and having lower connectivity at this point. It's a bit of a shame. Wanted to show you what it looks like. I guess that's how demos go. Right, let me just quickly check something. Okay, it has actually started, so it should run shortly. It should, show up shortly at least. Seems like. And that's the flow itself has actually started. It hasn't just launched the app yet. Sec. Oh, there it is. All right, so that's the ugly legacy system that it actually automates. So this should basically just now click through some UI elements over there to create a new entry in the documents list. And as it does, it will also create some entries in the services list, and it will check if the vendor already exists. If it doesn't, then it will also create a vendor, and so on. It's localized, as mentioned, and ugly as hell, but actually very easy to automate because it's not infused with lots of JavaScript and some funky code, and it's not beautified and That's why it's actually pretty easy to automate the user interface. When it comes to automating Dynamics applications, especially the cloud ones, automating them via the user interface is a hell. It's definitely not advised. It's very difficult to do because it's because of the way it's built, basically. So, but the good thing, obviously, about it is that they have their integrations. They have the APIs, the web services, or even databases that we could tap into. So at least we don't actually need to automate the user interface in that case. That's a good thing. So that's also why we should go that way whenever possible. Right. Okay. So as this is progressing, I think I can. Okay. Well, it will create those entry the line items. Just a sec. Right. So the company doesn't exist. Okay, I think I'll just let it continue. I don't think it will actually disturb it as much if I just switch back to the slides. It's a bit slowish, seems like. That might be because of the streaming parts, actually. Right, give me a sec. I will switch back to the slides. And okay, well, it's actually taking over my mouse, so I might actually have to let it finish off. So I could just basically go through the key takeaways of the whole thing, which would be the next slide while this actually continues. So the key takeaways are basically that when it makes sense, and it doesn't necessarily always make sense to automate invoices with AI Builder. If you just looking for a small scale implementation of only automating some of the largest suppliers, and not all of them, and it might just make sense to go with a simpler way. But when you check out the right licensing, and when you figure out that AI Builder does not necessarily have to be a very expensive solution, if you just kind of pull up a few Power Automate premium licenses to actually cover your needs, it makes a lot of sense even for smaller businesses to automate it, and it works very well when if you have lots of vendors, lots of different templates, and if you need to work with both scanned documents and electronically generated documents. So, but then when you use AI Builder models, make sure to use as few models as possible to cover your needs with as many collections as needed. So if you can fit all of your vendors or all of your automation needs within a single model with up to 200 collections, that's great. But if you need more than that, you'll need more models, and then you might need more complex logic into figuring out which model to use. When you train your models, make sure you provide as many documents as you can to each collection for better accuracy, and try to use pre-configured document types and fields as much as you can. That will make it easier to actually train the model, less manual work in tagging those fields and so on. Try to go for over 90% accuracy. If you noticed, my model was actually at something like 98 or 99%. It won't always work, but these tips I gave you with splitting, assigning a collection for every single vendor, if your vendors have both digital and scanned documents, split those across the separate collections as well, and then have as many documents. If you do that, you will achieve high accuracy. But even if it's lower than 90% or whatever you want, the AI builder action actually returns the confidence score for each document it processes. It will basically return whatever it, how confident it is with the data it has retrieved. So you can actually add some logic into your flow for basically checking whether or not it was, it's confident enough that it actually processed the invoice correctly. And then you can add some, logic, some checks, maybe include a human in the loop if it's below a certain threshold. And then, only use desktop flows if you actually absolutely need to automate a legacy app. If possible, if you actually work with more modern applications, use direct integrations via cloud flows. That will be much more efficient. But if you do end up using desktop flows, use work queues for passing document data from cloud to desktop, because that's, again, more efficient. It will also give you some, okay, well, it finished. So switch, actually turn on the slides. So, all right, so if you, the work queues will not only let you resubmit your flows, debug them better, but it will also give you some analytics on the invoices you've processed. So that's a great way to log that, basically. Right, and that's that for the session today. For those of you, the few that are still remaining online, I would really appreciate it if you could, leave some feedback. This QR code over here will take you to a form where I'm just asking a couple of questions. I would really appreciate it if you could, leave the feedback on the session, whether positive or negative. As long as it's constructive, it will help me improve. And then if you want to, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I share content about Power Automate on there frequently. I've also got a YouTube channel with a single video over there right now about the framework that I've built for Power Automate desktop flows, but I'll have more there in the future. And that's that. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Agnes, for giving a very insightful session. And I'm sure that everyone has the takeaway here. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining the session. We would like to invite you for further sessions and request all to stay tuned with our page for the upcoming events. And we have a good news for all of you that we will be doing a AI summit in Dubai very soon. Mostly in the end of January or in the starting weeks of February, and we'll release the post shown that shooting all the details regarding the session and the speakers and invites. Thank you. Thanks again, Agnes, for taking your time and giving an insightful session for this user group.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for having me, and hope this was useful, and see you around.
Thank you. Thank you, Agnes. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you.